The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, when Judas had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. Both Stephen and I were on retreat this week, along with a slightly fluctuating group of 25 to 28 others. It's one of my failings. I happen to be a counter, and so kind of see the slight movement in the group. It was a fairly busy retreat. I think they were trying to keep us busy so we wouldn't think too much. But I always try to steal off a fair bit on my own, and it was a beautiful week for that. Our retreat house is a great resource that a lot of us don't ever think of. It's always also even a great place if you just want to go out and walk through these stations of the cross. They've done a lot of kind of clearing of some of the old lumber in around there so that it seems a little more open now and fresher, and yet it's still a beautiful little path through the 14 stations of the cross. And I went through them a number of times. One of the things in years gone by that I used to try to do during the retreat, which I did not do this year, but I used to try to read through the whole book of the Acts of the Apostles. We hear a fair bit from it during the Easter season, and it's just strange name after strange name. And so one year, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I took a biblical atlas with me, and as I read, I kept tracing out the path of Paul and Barnabas and Mark and whoever else was recorded as traveling with him. And it was striking to do that because all these strange names, when you look at them on the map and saw how you'd move from one to the other, it made perfect sense. These truly were missionary journeys. Of course, it was harder to travel in those days, but that's the way it was, and so everybody who traveled had to put up with that. But it was fascinating to see how Paul, over the course of a number of years, through 3 major missionary journeys and through other travels, tried to bring the Christian faith, starting often with larger centers and then spreading out from there to the suburbs, the under cities, the smaller places, so that the faith that starts here will continue to try to spread out. And really by the time of the martyrdom of St. Peter and St. Paul, the faith had spread almost around the whole of the Mediterranean basin and even beyond that. One of the things we hear about in today is that after preaching and sometimes staying a fair bit of time in an individual area, more time usually in the larger places than the smaller ones, that they would appoint elders and would pray over them and then would leave them behind. The Greek word used for elders there is presbyteroi. Presbyter is coming from it. Presbyterian as well. It's coming from that Greek word. It's the word for elders, but not just elders that happen to have lived long enough, but elders who are considered to be leaders in the community. I'm telling you all this because it was easier to become a priest in Paul and Barnabas's day. Today it's more complicated. And it's even more complicated if you happen to have a wife and family as well. But this week something special is going to happen in Stephen Mawini's life. For every one of us who has become or will become a priest now for over 50 years, one of the starting steps is something called admission to candidacy for the diaconate and the priesthood. Now, in my time in Belgium, I received that about 10 days after landing in Belgium. Some of our seminaries, you have to wait a few years before they give it to you. But it's a simple step of recognition of the church that someone is on the road in a formal way towards preparation for the diaconate and the priesthood. A second step that all of us had to receive is to be installed as lectors in a certain formal, universal way recognized in all churches where the church is, all countries where the church is. In my time, I received that in my first year, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. Others, pretty typically, I think, Father Joe, first year was often a time for lectorate to be administered. And then usually in our second year, we would be admitted to the ministry of acolyte. An acolyte is one who follows after the priest and who assists and serves at the altar and who assists in the distribution of Holy Communion. Again, these installations were done and are done in a solemn way. Interestingly enough, when they grew out of the old minor orders some 51 or 2 years ago, it was said that they were open to any other man, not just those preparing for orders, although I don't think I ever ran across somebody who actually received them. And now, as of several years ago, Pope Francis broadened it again. They're open to both men and women on a stable basis. Again, I've not yet run across any, at least not in this neck of the woods. I'm telling you all this because poor Stephen has to cram all these 3 celebrations into one evening's Mass. And it's going to happen this coming Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. Bishop Riesbeck will be here. Stephen has handwritten, as is the custom, 3 different petitions, handed them to me today. The bishop will formally accept them, and then in a liturgical rite of really 3 rites, kind of rolled into one, he will be admitted as a candidate for the diaconate and the priesthood. He will receive the ministry of lector, and he will receive the ministry of acolyte. And I hope, if you're available, that some of you will come in order, 1, to support him, and 2, to see what all of this is about. So it's this coming Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock here in this church, and you're all welcome.